The alarm did not sound like a drill. It cut through the orientation hall in one long, breathless note, and every light in the ceiling switched from soft white to blood red before I had even finished sitting down. I was still holding my bag when the floor gave a small shudder under my boots, the kind of shudder that told me something far below us had gone wrong in a very real way. I had picked the back row out of habit, nothing more. It gave me a clear view of the room and a clear path to the door. I did not know yet that this simple choice was about to be the only reason I stayed calm while everyone around me began to panic. The hall was full of delegates from a dozen worlds, all of them gathered for the first briefing of a new peacekeeping mission. Clawed hands, scaled shoulders, wide, unblinking eyes, all turned toward the ceiling as the emergency voice began repeating the same warning over and over. Hull pressure falling. Section 9. Seal all doors. I did not move at first. I counted my breaths the way I always did, when my chest wanted to run ahead of my mind. Then I looked at the exits, the way I always did, and I saw that the nearest shelter hatch was already crowded with bodies pushing against each other, wasting seconds that none of us actually had. A tall creature with narrow silver eyes and long retractable claws was seated 3 rows ahead of me. His name was Draven, and he had introduced himself to me only an hour earlier with a stiff nod and very few words. Now he turned fully around in his seat, staring at me instead of the crowd fighting at the hatch. I did not understand why he was watching me and not the danger behind him. I only understood that the crowd at the hatch was not moving fast enough, and that somebody needed to find another way out before the pressure alarm turned from a warning into something worse. I stood, walked past the panicking cluster of bodies, and found a second hatch further down the wall, one that almost nobody had noticed because it was partly hidden behind a support column. I called out to the people near me, told them to follow, and my voice came out steadier than I expected it to. Draven was the first to follow me. He moved with a speed that made the floor tremble slightly under his weight, yet he stayed just behind my shoulder instead of pushing ahead, as if he wanted to see what I would do next before he decided what to do himself. We reached the second hatch just as the first one locked shut on its own, sealed by the ship to stop the pressure loss from spreading. If we had stayed in that first crowd, we would have been trapped on the wrong side of a door that was never going to open again in time. Inside the shelter corridor, the alarm dropped to a lower hum, and the red lighting softened into something closer to orange. For a moment I thought the danger had passed, but then a voice came through the wall speaker, calm and mechanical, saying that the coolant line feeding the reactor 2 decks below had ruptured, and that the automatic systems needed a manual reset before the temperature climbed any higher. Nobody moved. The corridor was full of delegates who had spent their whole lives learning how to negotiate, not how to fix a broken reactor line. I looked at the small diagram glowing on the wall panel beside the shelter door, a simple map of pipes and valves that any station worker would recognize in seconds, and something in me refused to just stand there and wait for someone else to solve it. I told Draven to keep everyone calm and away from the lower corridor, and I moved toward the maintenance shaft at the end of the hall. He grabbed my arm once, not to stop me, but to ask if I understood what I was walking into. I told him the truth, that I did not fully understand it, but that waiting was worse than trying. The maintenance shaft was narrow and warm, lit only by strips of amber light along the floor. I climbed down 2 levels using the built-in rungs, my hands steady even though my heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. At the bottom, I found the ruptured line exactly where the diagram had shown it, hissing softly, releasing a thin trail of vapor into the corridor. There was a manual valve beside it, stiff with age, the kind of valve built for emergencies just like this one. I turned it with both hands, slowly at first, then harder, until it finally gave way, and the hissing sound dropped into silence. The corridor lights above me flickered once, then steadied into a calm, even white. When I climbed back up into the shelter corridor, the mechanical voice announced that the pressure had stabilized and that the emergency was over. The delegates around me let out breaths they had clearly been holding since the alarm first sounded, and for a moment nobody said anything at all. Draven was the one who finally broke the silence. He asked me how I knew where to go, how I understood a diagram built for a species that was not my own, and how I managed to stay so still while everyone else in the room had been ready to run in every direction at once. I told him I did not have a perfect answer. I told him that on my world, humans had spent a very long time learning to notice danger before it fully arrived, and to act on it quietly instead of freezing. It was not a skill anyone taught me in a classroom. It was something older than that, something that lived in the back of my mind long before I ever stepped onto a ship among the stars. He studied me for a long moment, the way a hunter studies something it cannot quite place in the world it knows. Then he said something I did not expect. He said that on his own world, the creatures who survived the longest were never the loudest or the strongest, but the ones who stayed calm exactly when everyone else stopped thinking clearly. Word of what happened in Section 9 spread through the station faster than I expected. By the time the second half of orientation began, delegates from species I had not even met yet were glancing toward the back row where I sat, some with curiosity, some with something closer to respect, and a few, mostly the predator species among them, with a quiet kind of caution I had only seen once before, in the eyes of Draven, right after the alarm first sounded. A soft-spoken woman named Grace, who worked in station logistics, found me during the break and asked if I had done anything like that before. I told her the truth, that I had not, that I simply refused to freeze when the moment demanded movement. She smiled and said that was rarer than I probably realized, even among people from my own world. Later that day, the station commander, a steady man named Henry, called me into his office and told me the coolant failure had not been part of any planned drill. It was a genuine fault in an aging system, one that should have triggered an automatic shutdown long before it became dangerous. He said if I had waited even a few minutes longer before finding that second hatch, the outcome for everyone in that hall could have been very different. I did not feel like a hero walking out of his office. I felt like someone who had simply refused to stand still while something bad was happening around her. But I understood, maybe for the first time since arriving on that station, why so many eyes kept finding their way back to me throughout the day. That evening, I returned to the same hall for the final part of orientation, and out of habit, I chose the same back row seat again. Draven sat 2 seats closer than before, angled slightly so he could watch both me and the door at the same time. He did not explain why. He did not need to. I realized then that this quiet habit of mine, the one I never gave much thought to before boarding this station, was not a weakness or a strange quirk to be corrected. It was something worth keeping, something worth trusting. And as the final briefing began, with dozens of eyes from a dozen different worlds occasionally drifting toward the back row where I sat, I understood that being watched by every predator in that room was not a warning sign at all. It was simply their way of recognizing something steady in a room full of uncertainty, and for the first time since stepping onto that station, I did not mind being watched at all.